In this video we're going to look at how we can work with the Gradle wrapper, which is provided with a default Spring Boot application created with the Spring Initializer website, providing of course you've chosen Gradle as the build technology you want to use. So let's go into Terminal, and if I just increase that size and maximize it, if I go into my downloads directory, then we can see here a demo project which I've just created with the Spring Initializer website. So the project doesn't have any dependencies in it, and it's just got all the default settings that the Spring Initializer website provides. The difference being I've swapped it from using Maven as a build technology to using Gradle instead. So if I just cd into here we can see the contents of the generated project. So we can see we have a build.gradle file in the root of the project. So let's open that up in Sublime Text and just have a quick look. So this defines the usual things we'd expect to see. So the group ID and version, the Java source compatibility, which here is 1.8, repository that's going to use to resolve dependencies, which is standard, is the Maven central repository located at repo1.maven.org. We can see some plugins which the project also uses to provide integration with Spring Boot itself, which we'll see in a second. A test section, which is it's used in JUnit, and finally a dependencies section with the Spring Boot starter dependency and also a test dependency, just so that it can access a Spring Boot test framework to enable us to do testing as well out of the box. So if we close that and go back out to Terminal, so let's discuss what we have here as pertaining to Gradle. So we can see we've got a settings.gradle file which defines global properties if we were to have a multi-module project, which this project isn't. It's a single level, top level project, but nonetheless most Gradle projects have a settings.gradle there anyway, just to facilitate the move into multi-module projects if the project evolves in that way. We also have the build.gradle file, which we've just seen, which defines the actual configuration to do the build itself with Gradle, to build the project and be able to run it and that kind of thing. We see two scripts, which are GradleW and GradleW.bat, and these are basically scripts which we'll use to invoke the Gradle wrapper, which enables that wrapper to download the actual real Gradle installation locally onto our system, such that subsequently whenever we invoke Gradle commands through these scripts, or through either script which you're using, it will use the downloaded Gradle distribution which the wrapper set up for us. By the way, as far as these two scripts go, we have two scripts for the two different operating system flavors. So if you're running a Windows machine, and you're developing with Windows, you'd use GradleW.bat from a DOS prompt or command prompt. And if you're in the Linux world or on Mac or Unix, you'd use GradleW. So yeah, those are the two scripts that in general you'll be using to do the Gradle builds to build your Spring Boot project with. This leaves us with just one more artifact to talk about now, and that's the Gradle repository, which is here. So let's just have a quick look inside there. So if we open up our Gradle directory, we can see here that we have a wrapper subdirectory. So if we click on wrapper to get into that directory, we can see there we have two files. We have Gradle wrapper.jar and Gradle wrapper.properties. So if we just have a look at Gradle wrapper.properties, and look at this alongside the contents of the folder. So what's going to happen is, and how the Gradle wrapper works, is that the first time you invoke a Gradle command through one of these scripts, so GradleW or GradleW.bat, it's going to check and see if you have the Gradle version it specifies in this properties file here. It's going to check if you have Gradle641bin.zip, and if you don't have it, it's going to use the code inside here, Gradle wrapper.jar, to basically download this distribution, which is here, you can see, at services.gradle.org, distributions, and then this distribution file name, and it's going to unzip that then into Gradle user home, which is a .gradle folder under your user home directory. So on Mac that's ~.gradle, and on Windows it might be /users and then your username in the latest versions of Windows. And it's going to unzip that into the wrapper dists folder under a subdirectory of the same name, so Gradle 6.4.1. So this wrapper mechanism is nice because it means that you don't have to set up the build tool yourself on your system. This wrapper mechanism is going to take care of downloading the version which the project requires and installing it onto your local system for you, and it's always going to use that same version. So that's nice because, particularly with Gradle, sometimes you can run into issues where, because of differences in the Gradle DSL, that's the syntax used to create the Gradle files, because of differences in syntax between different versions, sometimes you can get some very obscure errors in Gradle, and it means things just won't build the way you expect in the best case, or in the worst case they just won't build at all. So it's nice to always have a consistent version when you're building your projects, and this wrapper mechanism gives you that facility. So let's clear that down now with Command K. You can also type clear and hit enter, or CLS on DOS in Windows, Control L in Unix. And now we're going to use the Gradle wrapper to run the Spring Boot project. So let's go Gradle W, because I'm on Mac, that's the version that I need. And I'm prefixing it here, you can see with a /, and that's because I don't have the current directory, which is represented by dot. I don't have that in my current path. So by prefixing it with /, I'm telling the system to look for that file in the current directory, which is where it is. And then the command we're going to use is boot run. And notice it's camel cased here as well. So boot run is basically the task which is made available to us from the Gradle Spring Boot plugin, and it allows us to run a Spring Boot application. So if I hit enter now, you can see I didn't have this specific version of Gradle, so Gradle 641, I didn't have it on my system. So now it's downloading that from services.gradle.org in that location there. That'll take a few moments. And now you can see it's building the project. So behind the scenes it's actually downloading all of the dependencies which the project itself needs, which are the Spring Boot starter dependencies included in the project. Although it's not as obvious that it's doing that as it would be with a Maven build, for example. Maven tends to be very verbose with its output, whereas the newer versions of Gradle output the progress messages on the same line, pretty much, which keeps things tidier. And yeah, it's finished. So now you can see we're using version 2.3.1 of Spring Boot, and it started the demo application. So here you see started demo application in 0.45 seconds. And in this particular demo application I didn't include any other dependencies, so because I didn't include any dependencies which would have caused the application to keep running, so for example if you're developing a web app and include Spring Web for the Spring Web MVC stuff in your application, then when you do a boot run then, it would keep the application going because it's a web container, so it keeps it running to actively listen on a port, which by default is 8080 to listen to web requests or HTTP requests. Because I didn't include anything like that in my dependencies, the application just starts up and then it finishes, which is fine, and that's what we expect. Now if I Command K and if I do that command again, we'll see this time it'll be much quicker. And you see it's just a few seconds, actually 1 second in fact. And the reason being is because it's already downloaded that Gradle wrapper, so that distribution we saw it downloading before, it's already downloaded that, it's already using it, and furthermore it's already got the dependencies which it requires in its local Gradle cache. So if we Command K again, let's just see where it's installed the Gradle distribution to. So if I look inside the .gradle folder in my home directory, you'll see here we've got a wrapper. If I open that up, which is probably a better way of looking at things, then you'll see I have a wrapper subdirectory here and a dists subdirectory. And if I just open this up now, you should see that in here, this specific directory, then this is the actual Gradle distribution that it's downloaded. So if I go back out, and if I just right click and do get info, you can see here that it's open 4th of July at 3:44, which is, if you look here, just a few minutes ago, and it's done that because I didn't have that specific version of Gradle on my system. I did have other versions, as you can see, but I didn't have that specific version. So it's nice because it means that through this mechanism you're always going to get the exact version that you need, and also it's going to reuse and make available these other versions for other Gradle projects. And the reason for that is because it's not stored it inside the project itself, instead it's stored it inside the .gradle folder in your home directory. If I go back out and then jump up to caches and go into modules 2 and then files 2.1, it's always a bit strange in Gradle with these strange sounding folders. Maven's much more straightforward with its .m2/repository folder. However, if we go inside caches, modules 2 and files 2.1, we'll see that these are all of the dependencies which exist in my Gradle repository. So if I maximize that, and for example now if I look for org, see org.springframework, yeah, org.springframework.boot, that's where all the Spring Boot dependencies live. And we can see here Spring Boot, and we can see 2.3.1 release. And if I go back out and rerun the app again quickly, you'll see that here we're using 2.3.1 release. Here it's downloaded 231 release, and also if I get the info on that, you can see here that it downloaded it shortly after it downloaded the Gradle wrapper as well, at 3:45. So now at this stage, the wrapper has downloaded the Gradle distribution that was specified in the project, it's cached that, it's available for future invocations of Gradle, and the Spring Boot dependencies are downloaded too. So if I close that and close that, so Command K here, I can now just execute Gradle commands like I could do in any regular Gradle based project. So for example, I could choose to clean the project, and if I look now, you'll see that there's no build folder. So normally with Gradle projects you have a build folder where all the built artifacts are placed. So for example, class files, resources, generated artifacts, that kind of thing. I can again Command K, and I could choose to, for example, compile Java, which would compile the production Java source code. So that's done that. Now if I look, we can see we've got that build folder here, and we can see if we look inside the build folder, there's our class file of the Spring Boot production Java application. So yeah, that's a nice introduction to how you can get up and running using the Gradle wrapper and the Gradle build tool itself to work with your Spring Boot application projects.